My daughter said I was too old-fashioned for her baby shower, too judgmental, she'd whispered to her husband, not realizing I was in the next room, the door slightly ajar, my heart catching on every syllable like a snagged thread. She said my presence would make her friends uncomfortable, that I just wouldn't understand their modern way of celebrating. So I smiled when she finally told me, a vague excuse about limited space, and I nodded, my throat too tight to offer the handmade quilt I'd spent months stitching, each tiny square a prayer for my grandchild. They thought my silence meant acceptance, that I'd just fade quietly into the floral wallpaper of their lives. They had no idea that my silence was the sound of me picking up a pen, the sound of me dialing my oldest friend, the sound of me rewriting my legacy, one uninvited guest at a time. They thought I was just a forgotten old woman. They were about to learn that forgotten women have the longest memories and the firmest resolve. Now, let me tell you what really happened. It began, as these things often do, with a ripple of excitement, a carefully concealed hope. Chloe was pregnant, my first grandchild. The news had arrived not in a joyful phone call, but in a casual mention during a brief, distracted visit. Even then, I'd brushed aside the slight, focusing instead on the promise of a new life. I imagined tiny fingers, the soft scent of baby powder, the chance to finally feel needed again, truly seen. The baby shower was to be in May, a garden party at their new, rather expensive home, the one I discreetly helped them secure the down payment for, a fact Chloe often forgot to mention. I'd started planning immediately. In my mind, I was already there, helping arrange tiny sandwiches, fussing over decorations. I'd spent weeks searching for the perfect gift, finally settling on the quilt. It wasn't just fabric and thread, it was generations of love stitched into a pattern of rising suns, a symbol of new beginnings. I'd used threads from my own wedding quilt, pieces of my mother's favorite apron. Each stitch was a story, a blessing. I'd even bought a new dress, a soft lavender that Chloe once said made me look younger, though I suspected now that comment had been more about her own discomfort with my age than a genuine compliment. The first hint that something was amiss came subtly. Chloe stopped answering my calls as frequently. When I asked about the shower details, her voice was vague, rushed. "Oh, Mom, we're still figuring things out. It's going to be mostly my friends, you know, a younger crowd." I'd nodded, a familiar ache settling in my chest. "Of course, dear. Just let me know if you need anything." The actual uninvitation wasn't a direct statement. It was a slow, deliberate erasure. I heard about the Eveets going out for my niece, who called to ask what I was wearing. I'd feigned surprise, said I hadn't seen mine yet, maybe it went to spam. Then came the hushed conversation I overheard between Chloe and her husband, Mark. I'd stopped by unannounced with a pot of my chicken soup, a peace offering for some unspoken tension. They were in the kitchen, their voices low, but the thin walls of their modern, open-plan house carried every word. "Are you sure about not having your mom there?" Mark had asked, a sliver of concern in his tone. Chloe's sigh was heavy, impatient. "Mark, we've been over this. She'll just hover, and her taste is so dated. She'll make comments about the food, or the games, or how young everyone is. My friends won't get her. It's better this way. Less awkward for everyone. Less awkward for them, perhaps. For me, it was a quiet devastation. I left the soup on their doorstep, a silent offering to a relationship that felt increasingly one-sided. The quilt remained in its tissue-lined box, a testament to a love they no longer seemed to value, or perhaps, had never truly understood. I didn't confront them. What was the point? Their decision was made, whispered behind closed doors, solidified in their shared convenience. My heart felt like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. This wasn't just about a party, it was about a pattern, a slow dismissal that had been building for years, and I, in my quiet hope, had refused to see it until it was spelled out in the cruel calculus of their comfort over my presence. The lavender dress hung in my closet, a silent reproach. The rising suns on the quilt seemed to mock my dimming hope. My life had been a tapestry woven with threads of sacrifice, each one pulled taut to ensure Chloe had everything she needed, everything I never had. I remembered her first day of school, her small hand clutching mine, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. I'd packed her lunch with a note cut into the shape of a heart, a ritual I maintained until she deemed it too childish. I worked double shifts at the bakery for years, the scent of yeast and sugar clinging to my clothes like a second skin. Also, she could have piano lessons, ballet classes, the best art supplies. When her father, my dear Samuel, passed away too young, Chloe was just starting college. The weight of grief was immense, but the weight of responsibility was heavier. I took on extra mending work at night, my fingers often stiff and sore by morning, to ensure her tuition was paid, that she never had to worry about the bills piling up on our small kitchen table. She'd call, sometimes, from her dorm room, homesick and overwhelmed. I'd listen for hours, offering comfort, advice, a steady presence in her turbulent world. "You're my rock, Mom," she'd say, and those words were like fuel, keeping me going through the lonely nights and exhausting days. Her wedding to Mark had been a grand affair, far beyond what I could have afforded alone. But I dipped into my savings, the nest egg Samuel and I had painstakingly built, because I wanted her to have the day she'd always dreamed of. I'd smiled through the ceremony, my heart swelling with a bittersweet mix of pride and sorrow, watching her start a new life, a life that, I slowly began to realize, had less and less space for me. The drift was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Fewer phone calls, shorter visits. When she did come over, her eyes would often scan my small, familiar living room with a polite disinterest, as if it were a museum exhibit she was obliged to view. Mark, though civil, always seemed preoccupied, his attention tethered to his phone. I'd try to engage them, share stories, offer them tea and my homemade cookies, but their responses were often distracted, their smiles fleeting. The baby shower snub wasn't an isolated incident, it was the culmination of countless smaller dismissals. There was the time they'd forgotten to invite me to Mark's promotion dinner, only for me to see the celebratory photos on Chloe's social media page the next day. Or the Mother's Day brunch where Chloe spent most of the time texting her friends, leaving me to make awkward small talk with a waiter who seemed more engaged in our conversation than my own daughter. I'd bought the quilt for the baby with such love. It wasn't just a gift, it was a piece of our family, a bridge between generations. The pattern, Grandmother's Sunburst, was one my own grandmother had taught me. I'd imagined Chloe wrapping her baby in it, telling stories about its origins. Now, it sat in its box, a vibrant, painful reminder of a connection that felt severed. My internal struggle was a constant hum beneath the surface of my days. I'd make excuses for her. She's busy, she's stressed, starting a family is overwhelming. I'd tell myself I was being too sensitive, that I shouldn't expect so much. But a persistent voice, the voice of Samuel perhaps, or just my own weary intuition, whispered the truth. I was being taken for granted, my love treated not as a gift, but as an entitlement. The realization that they were planning a future, a whole new generation, without even a ceremonial place for me, was a profound sorrow. It wasn't about the party, not really. It was about the casual cruelty of their exclusion, the ease with which they could erase me from a moment so intrinsically tied to family, to motherhood, to the very sacrifices I had made for Chloe to reach this point in her life. They were building their perfect, modern family, and I, with my old-fashioned love and handmade gifts, simply didn't fit their aesthetic. The silence from Chloe about the shower was deafening, a void where anticipation and shared joy should have been. The day of the baby shower dawned bright and clear, the kind of May morning that usually filled me with a quiet sense of renewal. But that Saturday, the sunlight streaming through my kitchen window felt intrusive, too cheerful for the gray mood that had settled over me. I didn't wear the lavender dress. Instead, I put on my oldest, most comfortable cardigan, the one with a small darned hole near the elbow, a familiar comfort. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, not watching for a car that wouldn't arrive, but simply observing the world outside my quiet house. Birds flitted between the branches of the old oak tree Samuel had planted, neighbors walked their dogs, children's laughter drifted from a nearby park. Life went on, oblivious to the small, private grief unfolding in my living room. I didn't bake, I didn't fuss. The quilt remained in its box, a silent testament to unanswered love. Around midday, my niece, Sarah, Samuel's sister's girl, called. She was sweet, always thoughtful. "Auntie B," she began, her voice hesitant, "are you feeling all right? We're all here at Chloe's, and, well, we were wondering where you were." I took a slow breath. "Chloe decided it was best if I didn't attend, dear," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Something about it being a younger crowd. There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line. She didn't invite you?" Sarah stammered. "Oh, Auntie, that's awful. I had no idea. Everyone was asking about you, about your famous lemon bars." I managed a small, humorless laugh. "Well, the lemon bars are safe at home this year, Sarah. You all have a lovely time." After the call, a strange sort of calm descended. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a stark, undeniable truth. Later that afternoon, driven by a masochistic curiosity I couldn't quite control, I opened my rarely used social media account. Chloe, who usually posted infrequently, had her page set to public for the event, a cascade of pastel-colored joy. There they were, Chloe, radiant in a flowing floral dress, her hand resting on her swollen belly, Mark, beaming beside her, his arm possessively around her waist. The garden was a vision of Pinterest perfection, balloons in shades of blush and gold, a tiered cake adorned with sugar animals, tables laden with delicate finger foods. Friends I didn't recognize laughed and posed, their arms full of brightly wrapped gifts. My eyes scanned the images, searching for something, anything, a flicker of regret in Chloe's eyes, a mention of my absence in the gushing captions. There was nothing, just carefully curated happiness, a picture-perfect celebration from which I was conspicuously, completely, absent. One photo, in particular, made my breath catch. It was a close-up of the gift table, piled high with designer baby clothes, expensive toys, and sleek modern gadgets. And there, peeking out from beneath a silver Tiffany rattle, was a quilt. Not mine. This one was store-bought, a generic patchwork of muted grays and creams, perfectly matching the shower's sophisticated, neutral color scheme. It was a functional item, devoid of history, of story, of love stitched into its seams. It was, I realized with a pang, exactly what Chloe wanted, something that fit her aesthetic, something unburdened by the weight of my old-fashioned sentimentality. That was the moment the fragile dam of my composure finally broke. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and insistent. They weren't tears of self-pity, not entirely. They were tears of anger, of a deep, profound disappointment that settled in my bones like a chill. They thought I was just a quiet old woman, easily dismissed, easily forgotten. They had mistaken my patience for passivity, my love for weakness. They forgot that quiet women observe everything, that still waters run deep, and that even the softest heart can harden when betrayed. As I wiped my eyes, a new resolve began to crystallize within me. This wasn't just about a baby shower. This was about respect. This was about dignity. And I would not allow mine to be so casually discarded. The lavender dress might remain unworn, the quilt unbestowed, but my story, my legacy, was far from over. And I would be the one to write its final, decisive chapter. The decision wasn't born of sudden rage, but of a slow, simmering realization that had been building for years, finally ignited by the cold dismissal of the baby shower. For days, I moved through my house in a sort of daze. The image of that store-bought quilt, so impersonal and bland, seared into my mind. It symbolized everything, my replacement, my erasure, the commodification of love itself. I knew I couldn't let this pass. Not anymore. The hurt was too deep, the disrespect too blatant. I needed to do something, not to punish Chloe, though a part of me, the part one rarely acknowledged, yearned for her to feel a fraction of my pain, but to reclaim my own agency, to make a statement that my worth was not contingent on her approval or inclusion. My mind turned to Eleanor Vance. We'd been roommates in college, a lifetime ago, two bright-eyed girls full of dreams. Eleanor had gone on to become a formidable estate lawyer, known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, Christmas cards, and the occasional lengthy phone call catching up on decades. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but I knew if anyone could offer clear, practical advice, it was Eleanor. The internal debate before I picked up the phone was agonizing. Part of me screamed that this was too drastic, that I was overreacting, that families forgive. But another, stronger voice, a voice that sounded remarkably like my own mother's, reminded me that self-respect was not a negotiable commodity. Forgiveness was one thing, allowing oneself to be a doormat was another entirely. What would Samuel have said? He always believed in fairness, in standing up for oneself, even quietly. He'd never have stood for me being treated this way. Finally, with a deep breath that did little to steady my trembling hands, I dialed Eleanor's direct line, a number I'd kept tucked away in my old address book. She answered on the third ring, her voice as crisp and authoritative as I remembered. Eleanor Vance speaking. Eleanor, I began, my voice barely a whisper. It's Beatrice Nelson. B. Holloway, from college? There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. B. My goodness, it's been ages. How are you, dear? Her warmth momentarily disarmed me, and for a second, I almost lost my nerve. But the image of Chloe, smiling obliviously at her party, firmed my resolve. I laid out the situation, my voice gaining strength as I recounted the years of subtle dismissals, culminating in the baby shower debacle. I didn't embellish, didn't overdramatize. I simply told her the facts, the raw, painful truth of my exclusion. Eleanor listened patiently, without interruption, only the occasional soft hum of understanding punctuating my story. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, she said, her voice imbued with a steely compassion, B. My dear, what they did is unconscionable, and frankly, it's a tale as old as time. Children, wrapped up in their own lives, forgetting the sacrifices, taking for granted the very hands that raised them. Her validation was like a balm to my wounded spirit. I need to do something, Eleanor, I said. I need to rearrange my affairs, my will. I understand completely, Eleanor replied. You have every right to decide where your legacy goes. It's your life, your assets, your story to tell, right to the very end. When would you like to meet? We scheduled an appointment for the following week. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was a feeling of control, of quiet power. I had taken the first step. The ink on my old will, the one that named Chloe as the primary beneficiary of everything Samuel and I had worked our lives for, suddenly felt like a betrayal of myself. That would change. My legacy would not be a reward for disrespect. It would be a testament to my own worth, a final, indelible statement. The handmade quilt might never warm my grandchild, but the fruits of my life's labor would warm those who truly deserved, and perhaps, desperately needed it. The week leading up to my appointment with Eleanor was a blur of quiet contemplation and burgeoning resolve. I found myself looking at my home, my possessions, the small accumulation of a lifetime, with new eyes. Each item, from Samuel's old armchair to the chipped teacup I used every morning, seemed to whisper stories of love, sacrifice, and now, a quiet defiance. This was mine. I had earned it, and I would decide its fate. When the day of the meeting arrived, I dressed with care, choosing a simple navy dress and the string of pearls Samuel had given me on our 25th anniversary. They felt like armor, a reminder of a love that had been steadfast and true. Eleanor's office was downtown, a sleek, modern space that exuded competence. She greeted me with a warm, firm handshake and led me into a comfortable conference room overlooking the city. "Tea, B?" she offered. I nodded, grateful for the small normalcy. As we sipped our tea, Eleanor gently guided me through the process. "First," she said, her gaze direct but kind, "I want you to be absolutely sure about this. Changing a will, especially when it involves excluding a child, is a significant emotional step." I met her gaze without flinching. "I am sure, Eleanor, this isn't a decision made in anger. It's a decision made from a place of profound clarity. My daughter has made her choices, her priorities clear. Now, I am making mine." Eleanor nodded slowly. "All right then, let's go over your current will and your assets." We spent the next hour meticulously reviewing everything: the house, now fully paid off, Samuel's life insurance policy, which I'd carefully invested, my modest savings and retirement accounts. As she listed each item, memories flooded back, the years of scrimping and saving, the overtime shifts, the small luxuries foregone. It wasn't a vast fortune, but it was a lifetime of careful stewardship, of love made tangible. The emotional weight of striking Chloe's name from the document was immense. It felt like a final severing, a formal acknowledgement of a wound that might never heal. My hand trembled slightly as I watched Eleanor make the annotation on her legal pad. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about recognition, about love, about the painful understanding that the person I had poured my life into no longer valued my place in hers. "Now," Eleanor said gently, "the most important part. To whom do you wish to leave your estate?" I had given this a great deal of thought. "I wanted to go to the Haven for Young Mothers," I said, my voice clear and firm. It was a local charity I'd quietly supported for years, an organization that provided shelter, education, and support for young, single mothers who often had no family to turn to, women struggling to give their children the start in life that I had fought so hard to give Chloe. The irony was not lost on me. I was redirecting the resources meant for my own daughter, who had a comfortable life and a supportive husband, to young women who had so much less, yet perhaps understood the value of maternal love and support far more acutely. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, approving smile. "A most admirable choice, B. It reflects your heart." We discussed the details, setting up a trust, ensuring the funds would be managed responsibly. Eleanor drafted the new codicils and amendments with practiced efficiency. When it was time to sign, I picked up the pen, its weight feeling significant in my hand. As my signature flowed onto the crisp legal paper, a profound sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't the bitter satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet dignity of self-preservation. A burden I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying had been lifted. I had taken back control of my narrative, of my final act. The ink on that paper, I murmured, more to myself than to Eleanor, felt heavier than any tear I'd shed. Eleanor patted my hand. "You did the right thing for you, B. Your legacy will now be one of strength and generosity, on your terms." Leaving her office, the city air felt fresher, the sunlight brighter. I walked with a lighter step, the string of pearls a comforting weight against my skin. I had faced the hurt, acknowledged the betrayal, and taken decisive action. My future, and the future of what I left behind, was now firmly in my own hands. Chloe might never understand the depth of what she had lost, not just in material terms, but in the irreplaceable bond she had so carelessly fractured. But I understood, and that, I realized, was all that truly mattered. Life after changing the will settled into a new, quieter rhythm. I didn't announce my decision to Chloe, nor did I feel any compulsion to. My actions were for me, not for her reaction. I continued my days much as before, tending my small garden, reading, attending my book club, but there was an internal shift, a subtle realignment of my own worth. I was no longer waiting for crumbs of affection or acknowledgement from Chloe. I was, in a way, detached, an observer of a life that had once been so central to my own. Chloe did call a few weeks later. Her voice was breezy, oblivious. "Hey, Mom. Mark and I were thinking of redoing our guest bathroom. You know, the one we never use. We saw this amazing Italian tile, but it's a bit pricey. I was wondering if you might be able to, help us out a little? It would be an investment in the house, really." I listened, the old familiar ache attempting to resurface, but this time, something was different. My resolve, newly forged, held firm. "Chloe, dear," I said, my voice calm, "even, my finances are rather committed at the moment. I'm afraid I can't help you with that." There was a surprised silence on her end. "Oh, okay. Well, what are they committed to?" she asked, a hint of petulance in her tone. "To my priorities, Chloe," I replied gently. "Just my priorities." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Her disgruntled sigh was audible before she quickly changed the subject, chattering about some inconsequential neighborhood gossip before ending the call. She hadn't asked how I was. She hadn't mentioned the baby shower. It was as if it had never happened, or rather, as if my feelings about it were irrelevant. I hung up the phone not with anger, but with a quiet sadness. Her sense of entitlement, her casual assumption that my resources were hers to command, was so deeply ingrained. She was so blind to the chasm that had opened between us. My internal monologue during those weeks was a constant companion. I replayed memories, not just of the hurts, but of the good times too. Chloe as a little girl, her laughter echoing in the backyard, the way she used to snuggle into my lap for stories. It was a grieving process, I realized, for the daughter I thought I had, for the relationship I had cherished. But the grief was now tinged with a steely determination. I would not allow her to diminish me further. I found small joys in my newfound independence of spirit. I reconnected with old friends, women I hadn't seen in years, busy as I had been orbiting Chloe's life. We met for tea, shared stories, laughed until our sides ached. It was a reminder that my world was larger than one fractured relationship. One afternoon, my niece Sarah dropped by. She looked troubled. "Auntie B," she said, "I have to ask. Chloe told me you were being difficult about some money for their bathroom. Is everything okay between you two?" I poured her a cup of chamomile tea. "Sarah, dear," I said, "everything is exactly as it needs to be. Chloe and I are on different paths right now." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes full of unspoken questions. I didn't offer any more explanations. It wasn't her burden to carry, but her visit did make me wonder, would Chloe ever truly understand? Or would she continue on, oblivious, until one day the consequences of her actions finally, irrevocably, landed at her feet? I suspected the latter, and while a part of me mourned the mother-daughter bond we once shared, another, stronger part knew I had made the only choice I could to preserve my own dignity. My peace was no longer negotiable. The seeds of that peace were beginning to sprout, small, tentative, but undeniably there. The silence in my house no longer felt like loneliness, it felt like serenity. A few months passed. The autumn leaves turned brittle and brown, and a chill began to settle in the air. I was at my local library, browsing the new releases, when a situation arose that served as an unexpected test of my resolve. The library was hosting a fundraising bake sale for a children's literacy program. I'd baked a batch of my signature oatmeal raisin cookies, a recipe Samuel had adored. As I was arranging them on a platter, I heard a familiar voice. "Well, if it isn't Mom." Chloe stood a few feet away, Mark hovering awkwardly beside her. She was visibly pregnant now, her belly round and prominent beneath a stylish maternity top. My heart gave an involuntary lurch. It was the first time I'd seen her in person since before. "Chloe," I said, my voice neutral. "Mark, fancy meeting you here," Chloe said, her tone a little too bright, a little too forced. "We were just dropping off some books. Mark's decided to declutter his old sci-fi collection." She gestured vaguely towards a box he was holding. An awkward silence descended. Mark shifted his weight. Chloe's eyes flickered towards my cookies, then back to my face. "So," she said, still baking, "I see. Some things never change," I replied, a hint of irony in my voice that I hoped she caught. Then, the moment of truth. "Actually, Mom," Chloe began, her voice taking on that wheedling tone I knew so well, "we were just talking about the nursery. It's almost finished, but the custom glider I ordered is way over budget. Mark's been a bit stressed about finances with the baby coming and, well, I know you've always been so generous." She trailed off, her eyes wide and expectant. This was it. The familiar script. My cue to offer, to sacrifice, to smooth things over with my checkbook. But the woman standing before her was not the same woman from 6 months ago. I looked her directly in the eye. "Chloe," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "as I mentioned before, my financial commitments are quite specific now. I'm afraid I can't help with the glider." Her smile faltered. "Oh, right. Your priorities." The word dripped with a sarcasm she didn't bother to hide. "But this is for your grandchild, Mom." "My grandchild will be loved and cherished," I said, "but my financial support is now directed elsewhere, to causes that align with my current values." Mark, who had been silent, finally spoke. "B, that seems a bit harsh, don't you think? After all Chloe's done preparing." I turned my gaze to him. "And what about what Chloe has undone, Mark? Or what she has chosen not to do?" His face flushed, and he looked away. Chloe's eyes narrowed. "So, this is how it's going to be? You're really going to hold that stupid baby shower against me forever?" "It was never just about the baby shower, Chloe," I said, my voice still calm. "It was about a pattern of disrespect. It was about being made to feel invisible in my own family. My decisions now are a reflection of that." She scoffed, a bitter, unlovely sound. "Fine, be that way. Don't expect us to come crawling when you change your mind." "I don't expect you to crawl, Chloe," I said, "and I won't be changing my mind." I turned back to my cookies, my hands surprisingly steady. I could feel their eyes on my back as I meticulously arranged the last few on the platter. After a moment, they turned and walked away, their whispered, angry conversation trailing behind them. I didn't watch them go. I focused on the task at hand, a small smile playing on my lips. The encounter had been difficult, yes, but it had also been liberating. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth, and the sky hadn't fallen. The foundation of my new resolve had held firm. My legacy was my own, and it would be a legacy of strength, not silent suffering. The oatmeal raisin cookies, I noted with satisfaction, were selling rather well. The holidays approached, a season that had once been filled with boisterous family gatherings, the scent of roasting turkey, and Chloe's childhood laughter. This year, the silence in my small house felt different, not empty, but elective. I received a perfunctory Christmas card from Chloe and Mark, a generic photo of them smiling in front of a perfectly decorated tree, the baby bump prominent. The message inside was brief, impersonal: "Happy holidays, Mom. Love, Chloe, Mark, and Bump." No mention of the library encounter, no apology, no olive branch. Just a continued, determined obliviousness. I placed the card on the mantelpiece, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of the distance that now lay between us. It was Eleanor who first suggested how Chloe might learn about the will. "B," she said during one of our check-in calls, "at some point, if Chloe continues to make financial assumptions or requests, you may need to be more direct about your estate plans. Not in detail, perhaps, but enough to manage her expectations." I had been hesitant. The thought of that conversation filled me with a familiar dread, but Eleanor was right. Chloe's casual entitlement, her belief that my resources were an extension of her own, needed a more definitive boundary. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. In late January, Chloe called. Her voice was agitated. "Mom, we need to talk. Seriously. Mark and I have been looking at houses. We want to move before the baby comes, get something with a bigger yard. But the market is insane. We're a little short on the down payment for the one we really love. We were thinking, since you're in that small place all by yourself, and you've always said you wanted to help us build a future." The audacity of it stole my breath. She wasn't just asking for money, she was subtly suggesting I should downsize my own life, my own comfort, for her ambitions. "Chloe," I began, my voice tight with a carefully controlled anger, "we need to have a very clear conversation about my finances and my future plans." "Good," she said, misinterpreting my tone. "So, you'll help?" "No, Chloe, I won't. Not in the way you expect." I took a deep breath. "When Samuel passed, everything we had, everything we built together, I earmarked for you. It was always my intention that you would be well taken care of. But intentions, like relationships, can change when they are not nurtured or respected." "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharpening. "I'm talking about my will, Chloe. After the events of last spring, particularly your decision regarding the baby shower and the general pattern of our interactions, I made some significant changes to my estate plans." Silence. Then, a choked, You changed your will? Because of a party?" "It was never just about a party," I repeated wearily. "It was about respect. It was about feeling valued. It was about a daughter who couldn't find space for her mother in one of the most significant celebrations of her life." "So, you cut me out?" Her voice was incredulous, laced with a dawning horror. "You actually cut me out of your will?" My estate, Chloe, will be going to the Haven for Young Mothers, I said, my voice steady. They are an organization that supports women who often have no one else, women who understand the value of a helping hand, of kindness, of respect. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. You can't be serious. This is cruel, Mom. After everything, that's my inheritance. It was never your inheritance to demand, Chloe, I corrected gently. It was a gift I intended to give, a gift predicated on a loving, respectful relationship. You chose to devalue that relationship. You chose to exclude me. These are the consequences of those choices. Mark, you will not believe this. I heard her shout, her voice muffled as she turned from the phone. Then, back to me, her tone now venomous. You'll regret this, Mom. You'll die old and alone, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. The line went dead. I sat there, the receiver still pressed to my ear, the echo of her bitter words hanging in the air. There was a sharp pain in my chest, the familiar ache of a mother's broken heart. But beneath it, there was also a strange, steely calm. I had spoken the truth. I had drawn the line. The reading of my will, in a metaphorical sense, had just occurred. And Chloe, for the first time, had been forced to listen to a chapter she had no part in writing, and no power to change. The silence that followed was profound, filled with the unspoken and the irrevocable. The fallout was immediate and jarring, though not entirely unexpected. Mark called later that day, his voice a mixture of disbelief and blustering indignation. Chloe is devastated. I can't believe you'd do something so drastic, so vindictive, over a baby shower? It's just petty. Mark, I replied, my voice weary but firm, if you and Chloe still believe this is solely about a baby shower, then you've understood nothing of what I've tried to communicate for years. This is about a fundamental lack of respect, a pattern of dismissal that I am no longer willing to tolerate, even in legacy. But to give it all to charity, he sputtered. That's money that should be for your family, for your grandchild. My grandchild will be born into a comfortable home, with two parents who, I assume, are capable of providing for them, I stated. The Haven for Young Mothers supports those who have no such safety net. My decision reflects my values, Mark. Perhaps it's time you and Chloe examined yours. He hung up, clearly furious. The days that followed were filled with a tense silence from their end. No more calls, no texts. It was as if a curtain had fallen. I found myself thinking of the handmade quilt, still tucked away. I decided to donate it to the Haven, along with a selection of other baby items I'd lovingly collected over the years. Let it warm a child whose mother might appreciate the love stitched into its seams. My niece, Sarah, called, her voice laced with concern. Auntie B, I heard. Well, Chloe called Mom, and she was hysterical. Something about your will? I've made some changes to my estate, Sarah. Yes, I confirmed. Changes I felt were necessary. Are you sure? She asked tentatively. It sounds like Chloe is taking it very hard. Actions have consequences, dear, I said gently. Chloe is learning that. It's a difficult lesson, I know, but one she needed to learn. My peace of mind, my dignity, these are no longer up for negotiation. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I always admired your strength, Auntie B, she said finally. Even when you were being quiet, I always knew you were strong. Her words were a small comfort. During this time, my friendship with Eleanor deepened. She became more than just my lawyer. She was a confidant, a sounding board. We'd meet for tea, discussing books, current events, and sometimes, the painful complexities of family. You know, B, she said one afternoon, what you're doing is incredibly brave. So many women in your position just endure. They absorb the disrespect, the neglect, because they're afraid of losing what little connection they have, or they've been conditioned to believe their needs don't matter. I believed that for a long time, I admitted. I thought being a good mother meant endless sacrifice, even of my own self-respect. But there's a difference between sacrifice and self-erasure. I was erasing myself to make them comfortable. The baby, a little girl they named Lily, was born in early March. I saw the announcement on a mutual acquaintance's social media feed. A beautiful baby, with a shock of dark hair like Chloe's. A pang went through me, a grandmother's yearning to hold her, to smell that sweet newborn scent. But I didn't reach out. The ball was in their court. If Chloe wanted me in her daughter's life, she would have to be the one to bridge the chasm she had created. The silence from her end continued. Weeks turned into a month. I sent a simple, unsigned card with a small, tasteful silver rattle I'd found in an antique shop, a nod to the one I'd seen at the shower, but with a history, a story. No acknowledgement came. I grieved, not for the money or the legacy Chloe wouldn't receive, but for the lost relationship, for the granddaughter I might never truly know. But my resolve remained. My will was a statement, yes, but it was also a shield, protecting me from further hurt, from further diminishment. It was the ultimate boundary, drawn not in anger, but in the quiet, unshakable conviction of my own worth. Spring arrived, and with it, a fragile sense of renewal. My garden began to bloom, crocuses and daffodils pushing through the cold earth, a testament to life's persistence. I found a quiet joy in these simple things, a peace that was slowly, steadily, taking root in my soul. One cool April afternoon, as I was pruning my rose bushes, a car pulled up to the curb. My heart did a familiar flutter. It was Chloe, alone. She got out of the car slowly, holding a small, awkwardly wrapped package. Lily, I presumed, was with Mark or a sitter. She walked up my garden path, her steps hesitant, her face pale and drawn. She looked older, the carefree radiance of her baby shower photos replaced by a weary anxiety. "Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood on the bottom step, not attempting to come further. I put down my pruning shears and wiped my hands on my apron. "Chloe, can we talk?" she asked, her eyes pleading. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded towards the porch swing. "Have a seat." We sat in silence for a while, the old swing creaking rhythmically. The package lay on her lap. Finally, she spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking." She paused, struggling for words. "About everything. About the shower, the will, about us." I waited, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch. This was her moment to speak, her truth to tell, if she had one. "I was wrong," she said, the words tumbling out. "I was so wrong. I was selfish, and entitled, and cruel. I see that now." She looked down at her hands, twisting the ribbon on the package. "When Mark and I heard about the will, at first, I was just angry. I felt betrayed. How could you do that to me, to your own daughter, to your grandchild?" Her voice cracked. "But then I started to remember. Things you'd said, times you'd looked sad, and I hadn't noticed, or I hadn't wanted to notice." She took a shaky breath. "The baby shower, it wasn't about space, Mom. It wasn't about a younger crowd. It was me. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that my friends would see you, so different from their own mothers. Their mothers are all so modern, so put together. And you were just Mom, my mom. And I was ashamed of that. Ashamed that you weren't like them. Ashamed that I needed your help for the down payment on our house but didn't want you to cramp my style at my party." Her confession hung in the air, raw and painful. I felt a familiar sting behind my eyes, but I held it back. "And the money, Mom, we always assumed it would be there. That you would always be there, to bail us out, to fund our dreams, no questions asked. We took you for granted. I took you for granted." The package in her lap, she picked it up. This is the quilt you made. Sarah told me about it. She said it was beautiful. I found it in your cedar chest when I was looking for an old photo album last year, before all this. I knew it was for the baby, and I pretended I hadn't seen it because I'd already bought that stupid, expensive, meaningless one that matched the nursery." She held it out to me, her hands trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mom. I don't expect you to change your will back. I probably don't deserve either. But I needed to tell you. I needed you to know that I see it now. What I did, what I lost." I looked at her, truly looked at her. The defensive anger was gone, replaced by a genuine, painful remorse. I saw not just my daughter, but a flawed, struggling human being, finally confronting the consequences of her own blindness. The journey ahead for her, for us, was uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, a tiny, fragile shoot of hope pushed its way through the hardened soil of my heart. The silence between us was no longer a wall, but perhaps, just perhaps, an open space waiting to be filled. I didn't take the quilt from her, not immediately. My hands remained resting in my lap. "Thank you for your honesty, Chloe," I said, my voice soft. "It takes courage to admit those things." She looked up, surprised, a flicker of hope in her tear-filled eyes. "Does this mean?" "It means I hear you," I interrupted gently. "It means I acknowledge your apology. Forgiveness, Chloe, is a journey, not a destination. And so is trust." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "The will, it remains as it is. That decision wasn't just about punishing you. It was about affirming my own values, about ensuring my legacy supports those who truly need it, those who understand the meaning of respect and gratitude from the outset, not as an afterthought." Chloe nodded slowly, disappointment warring with understanding on her face. "I understand, Mom. I do. I guess I hoped." "Hope is a good thing to hold on to, Chloe," I said, "but it needs to be accompanied by consistent action. Words are easy, change is hard." I finally reached for the quilt, my fingers brushing hers. The fabric was soft, the stitches a testament to hours of loving labor. "This," I said, holding it, "is beautiful. It was made with a grandmother's love for a grandchild she hadn't yet met." I looked directly at her. "Perhaps, one day, Lily will receive it. When the time is right, when the love it represents can be received with the respect it deserves." We sat for a while longer, the porch swing creaking a gentle rhythm. Chloe told me about Lily, her first smile, the way she gripped her finger, the sleepless nights. I listened, offering a grandmother's quiet interest, but maintaining a careful, emotional distance. There were no easy resolutions, no tearful reconciliations that day, but there was a beginning, a fragile, tentative step towards understanding. When she left, there was a new quietness between us, not the heavy silence of unspoken resentment, but the lighter silence of acknowledged truths. I watched her drive away, the quilt resting on the swing beside me. My heart was a complex mix of residual pain, cautious hope, and a profound, unshakable sense of my own hard-won peace. My legacy was secure, not just in legal documents, but in the strength I had found to honor myself. The haven for young mothers would flourish, offering hope and practical help to countless women. And Chloe? Chloe had a long road ahead. Whether she would truly learn, truly change, remained to be seen. But she had taken the first step. And sometimes, that is all we can ask for. The will reading she would never be invited to had already served its purpose. It had forced a reckoning, not just for her, but for me as well. It had taught me that true love does not require self-annihilation, and that the most valuable inheritance one can leave is not money, but the example of a life lived with dignity and self-respect. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my peaceful garden, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had finally, truly, come home to myself. The lavender dress still hung in the closet, but it no longer felt like a reproach. It was just a dress. The quilt, however, held a new meaning, not of rejection, but of potential, of a future that might still hold a different kind of warmth, a different kind of connection, earned, not assumed. And that, I realized, was a legacy worth building, one stitch, one honest conversation, at a time.